Kill a Mockingbird, Chapter 3. This is one of my favorites. There's a lot that happens in here, but most of it is all the idea of Scout just being a child and Scout being different. Okay, so I told you this book deals with stereotypes. One of the stereotypes is gender roles. So, Scout being a girl is expected to do what girls are expected to do, which is wear dresses, be polite, be gentle, be kind, and mostly stay inside and learn to sew and cook and take care of babies. Those were your jobs. So Scout's not about any of that. And maybe it's because, she hasn't been around any females except for Calpurnia, but Scout is what you would consider a tomboy. She hates wearing dresses. She's everything that a boy was allowed to be. Rough, tumble, fights, playing in the dirt, fishing, going swimming in the creek. Those were all the things that she loved to do, and none of them were appropriate for a girl. I would not have done well living in this time period. You don't know it about me, but I'm a complete country girl, complete tomboy. I have my muck boots. Favorite activity as a kid was frog hunting. We ride four-wheelers and get muddy. I mean, my honeymoon, we went up north and rode four-wheelers in the mud. We didn't go to a tropical resort vacation place, but I'm a total country girl. And it's okay. Nowadays, it's fine. You can be a girl and still love to do all of those things like fishing, hunting, all of that. And you can get dressed up and be a lady. So, girls, we've really got the best of both worlds. And I could launch into a Miley Cyrus, Hannah Montana song right now, but I won't. So back in this time period, though, it wasn't okay. So Scout, she breaks that stereotype of what girls are supposed to do. And it's one of the things that she gets criticized for from the community. So I love chapter 3 because it opens with her smearing Walter Cunningham's face in the dirt. She's beating him up. They leave to go to lunch, and she catches him in the playground, and she is beating him up. She literally is sitting on top of him, smashing his face in the dirt because he got her in trouble. And along comes Jem, and Jem breaks it up. Oh, get off of him, and makes her leave him alone. And then Jem, are you Walter Cunningham? You're Cunningham's boy? He says, yes. Come home to dinner with us, meaning lunch. Okay, dinner was lunch. And Scout is furious, and Walter just kind of looks at her like, I don't know. And he goes, I promise, she's just crazy. She won't jump you no more. And Scout's just, fine, let's go. And so they go home to dinner, and they take Walter with them. And Walter, when he comes in, Atticus is home for dinner, lunch as well. And so when they come in and they sit down to eat, Calpurnia serves them, and Walter is just having a conversation with Atticus like they are grown men. And he tells Atticus, yeah, I can't pass. That's why I can't pass the first grade, Mr. Finch, is because I have to leave school every spring to go work the fields. And so I can't pass first grade. But now there's another youngin' who's old enough to work in the field, so I should be able to stay at school and be able to pass this year. This kid, it said in the other chapter that most of the first grade had failed it the year before. It's because these kids are from rural families, and when it's time to plant or it's time to harvest, you pull your kids out of school because you need the work, you need the help on the farm. So he can't pass. All right, so they're just sitting there talking, like men. And when Calpurnia brings the food and she sets it on the table, Walter asks for some molasses, some syrup. And to us, we don't understand why he would do this. But remember, he is from this extremely poor family. They only have what they can produce on their land. And for most people, molasses or syrup is what I'm going to call it, is like candy. It's super sweet. This is a time period where you don't have candy very often. If you have a piece of candy, you are so fortunate. So it's like such a special treat. So Walter never gets anything sweet like that. Walter doesn't get a lot of things. He hardly has enough food to even stay alive. So here he is in this house that they have plenty, and so he knows they're going to have syrup. This is his chance to have something like candy. So he asks for some, and he pours it all over his plate. And Scout, she just yells out, and what in the Sam Hill'd you do that for? You done ruined your dinner. And she gets yanked out of there by Calpurnia and brought to the kitchen. And Calpurnia gives her a stiff talking to about, you do not comment on the ways of other people. Did you catch that? Remember in the chapter where Mr. Radley died? And when he was carried by, Calpurnia said, there goes the meanest man God ever blew breath into. And it said Calpurnia rarely commented on the ways of whites. Now Calpurnia is telling Scout, you do not comment on the ways of other people. She knows this better than most. But she points out, that boy is your company. She's like, he ain't company, it's just Walter Cunningham. So Scout is already developing these feelings of superiority. She is white, upper class, privileged. Walter is not. He is lower class, and she has already got these feelings that he is less than she is, and that she has, he's just Walter. Like, he's nothing. He don't matter. And she says, that boy is your company. I don't care who he is, where he comes from. He is your company, and you will keep your opinions to yourself. So Scout didn't like that very much. She doesn't like being reprimanded. But I want to just point out the full meaning of her telling Scout, a privileged white girl, that you don't comment on the ways of other people. It's a lesson we could all learn. Okay? So she goes back to school. She's really mad at Calpurnia. She's had a bad day, right? She's made her teacher mad 3 times. She got punished. She got put in the corner. Now she got in trouble at home at lunchtime. So she's sitting there just fuming, mad at Calpurnia. And all of a sudden, her teacher screams like none other. And it's alive, her teacher screams. The male population, I'm on page 25 if you want to follow along. The male population of the class rushed to her as one assistant. Lord, I thought, she's scared of a mouse. Little Chuck Little, whose patience with all living things was phenomenal, said, which way did he go, Miss Caroline? And everybody assumes that it's a mouse. So they're going to try to catch the mouse. Miss Caroline is pointing a finger not at the floor or at a desk, but a hulking individual unknown to me. Little Chuck's face contracted, and he said gently, you mean him, ma'am? Yes'm, he's alive. Did he scare you in some way? She's pointing at one of her students and screaming. Can you imagine if I did this all of a sudden during class? Miss Caroline said desperately, I was just walking by when it crawled out of his hair. Just crawled right out of his hair. Little Chuck grinned broadly. There ain't no need to fear a cootie, ma'am. Ain't you ever seen one? Now don't you be afraid. You just go back to your desk and you teach us some more. Little Chuck was another member of the population who didn't know where his next meal was coming from, but he was a born gentleman. He put his hand under her elbow and led Miss Caroline to the front of the room. Now don't you fret, ma'am, he said. There ain't no need to fear a cootie. I'll just fetch you some cool water. So, this kid who extremely poor, but he has good manners. So being poor is no reason to not have manners. Okay? Miss Caroline says, what's your name, son? The boy blinks. Who, me? Burris Yule. Miss Caroline inspected her roll book. I have a Yule here, but I don't have a first name. Would you spell your first name for me? Don't know how. They call me Burst at home. This kid's in the first grade. He doesn't know how to spell his name, which I guess that's not so uncommon, but he's been there for 3 years. He's like 9. He should know how to spell his name. Okay? Well, Burris, said Miss Caroline, I think we better excuse you for the rest of the afternoon. I want you to go home and wash your hair. What for, missus? To get rid of the, cooties. You see, Burris, the other children might catch them. The boy stood up. Listen to this description of Burris Yule. He was the filthiest human I had ever seen. His neck was dark gray, the black backs of his hands were rusty, and his fingernails were black deep into the quick. He peered at Miss Caroline from a fist-sized clean spot on his face. No one had noticed him, probably, because Miss Caroline and I had entertained the class most of the morning. And Burris, said Miss Caroline, please bathe yourself before you come back to school tomorrow. Do you see the differences between Miss Caroline and her students? Having to tell a student to bathe himself? That's probably, no, I know. They don't teach you that in college when you're getting ready to become a teacher. There is nothing in there about students who have bad hygiene and what you need to do about it. She's not expecting to have to do this, to have to say this. The boy did not answer, but he gave a short, contemptuous snort. Oh, he said, you ain't sending me home. I was on the verge of leaving. I done my time for this year. What do you mean by that? Said Miss Caroline. One of the elderly members of the class answered her. He's one of the Yules, ma'am. This is the same way she started out in chapter 2. He's one of the Cunninghams, and she ends up getting in trouble. She wonders if this explanation will be as unsuccessful as my attempt. Again, I'm on page 27 if you're looking for this. But Miss Caroline seemed willing to listen. Whole school's full of 'em. They come the first day every year and then leave. The truant lady gets 'em here 'cause she threatens 'em with the sheriff, but she's given up trying to hold 'em. She reckons she's carried out the law just getting their names on the roll and running 'em here the first day. You're supposed to mark 'em absent the rest of the year. But what about your parents? Asked Miss Caroline with genuine concern. Ain't got no mother, was the answer, and their pa's right contentious. Mean. Burris Yule was flattered by the recital. Been comin' to the first day of the first grade for 3 years now, he said expansively. Reckon if I'm smart this year, they'll promote me to the second. Think it's going to happen? You only come the first day, you're not going to get promoted to the second grade. This kid's going to be in first grade his entire life. But he's proud to hear all this. He's proud to hear how his family is awful. He's proud to hear that his pa is right contentious, meaning his dad is just downright mean. He's proud of all this. Miss Caroline said, sit back down, please, Burris. And the moment she said it, I knew she had made a serious mistake. The boy's condensation flashed to anger. Now, there's a saying that says the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. If his pa is right contentious, meaning mean, how do you think Burris Yule is? If that's what he's been raised with no mother, how do you think he's going to act? And he instantly gets mad. You try and make me, missus. This is a 9-year-old kid telling the teacher, you just try and make me sit down. I can't imagine any of you acting like this towards me. And I teach high school. You guys are bigger than I am. Most of you are taller than I am. You're stronger than I am. But there's not a single one of you that would ever treat me like this. It's just unimaginable. Little Chuck Little got to his feet. "Let him go, ma'am," he said. "He's a mean one, a hard down mean one. He's liable to start something, and there's some little folks here." Little Chuck was among the most diminutive, meaning the smallest of men. But when Burris Yule turned toward him, Little Chuck's right hand went to his pocket. He's got a pocket knife in there. Everybody carried pocket knives at the time, just little short, um, just little knives that you open it up and it's got just a short little blade on it. But his hand goes to his pocket and he says, "Watch your step, Burris. I'd soon as kill you as look at you. Now go on home." These are 8 and 9-year-olds, and this is how they interact with each other. Burris seemed to be afraid of a child half his height. Miss Caroline took this advantage. "Burris, go home. If you don't, I'll call the principal. I'll have to report this anyway." The boy snorted and slouched leisurely to the door. Safely out of range, he turned and shouted, "Report and be damned to ye. Ain't no snot, no slut of a school teacher ever born can make me do nothing. You ain't making me go nowhere, missus. You just remember that. You ain't making me go nowhere." I've been teaching for 25 years. Not once have I ever been called a snot-nosed slut of a school teacher. Like I said, none of you would ever talk to me this way. So the kids make Miss Caroline feel better. What you're supposed to get from this whole interaction with Burris Yule is you've met another family. So you've met the Finches, and this is the kind of stuff that you should write in your notes. You met the Finches, Jem, Scout, Atticus. They represent good, moral white people. Okay? They are from the middle to upper class, but they're good people. They treat people kind based on the fact that they are just people. Doesn't matter what they are, who they are, what they look like. They are just good, moral people in the way that they interact with others. Now, you saw this thing of Scout saying, "Oh, he's just a Cunningham," and she got reprimanded for it. Because that's not how the Finches believe that you treat people. And so, this is how you train a child, is when they say something, do something that isn't okay, when they're starting to adopt society standards instead of your own personal moral standards or beliefs, you correct the children. So you can see that this is how Atticus wants the kids to be raised and how he wants them to behave. Then you met the Cunninghams. The Cunninghams represent the people, these are the white people who are good, hardworking, but poor people. Okay? Remember that social hierarchy that I showed you at the beginning, where at the top of the hierarchy with the most power were the rich whites? That's the Finches. The next level of the hierarchy was the hardworking whites. That's the Cunninghams. The next level of the hierarchy was the lazy, immoral whites. That's the Yules. The Yules are a disgusting group of people. They live next to the town dump. They are extremely poor, but they don't do anything about it to help themselves. Unlike the Cunninghams, who won't take anything that they can't pay back, the Yules, they have an expectation that it's up to other people to support them, that the community should take care of them, that at Christmas time somebody better bring a basket to my house. It's called white entitlement. That's what it is. They do nothing to better their situation. Mr. Yule won't take a job if he feels that it's beneath him. He's offered a job as the garbage collector in the town. Won't take it. That's a job for blacks. So he won't take a job to earn honest money. Instead, he expects the state to give them money, welfare money, which, by the way, when they do give the money to the Cunningham or to the Yules, Mr. Yule takes it and drinks it all away. He spends it on liquor, goes off in the woods, goes on a drinking binge for 2-3 days, and then comes back home with no money, no food, nothing for the kids. By the way, there's 7 of them. Yeah. So this is the kind of family that the Yules represent. And it's a law that kids have to go to school. So the truant lady, the lady who's in charge of making sure that kids go to school, comes to the Yule's house, threatens to send the sheriff because that's a real thing. Like, if you don't send your kids to school, if you don't homeschool them, if you don't do something, parents can literally go to jail for not sending their kids to school. So the truant lady comes out. She threatens to call the sheriff to get the kids to school. They come the first day. Their names get on the roll book, and then they never show up again. And you're just supposed to mark them absent, and that's how it goes. Now, if it were any other family, if it were the Cunninghams, if it were the Finches, if it were little Chuck Little, the truant lady would come to their house and force them to come back to school. She'd call the sheriff. He'd come to their houses. Atticus would go to jail. That's how they would be treated. But for the Yules, it's good enough if she can get them there the first day. And Atticus is going to make a comment on that. So when Scout comes home, she tells Atticus finally about her day, and she doesn't want to go to school anymore. She's like, you didn't go to school. You learned at home. Why can't I do that? You turned out just fine. And he's like, nope, you need to go to school. And he says there's ways of keeping them, meaning the Yules, in school by force, the police, but it's silly to force people like the Yules into a new environment. So on page 30, Atticus makes a comment. It's not on your worksheet, so I want you to make sure you get this. He makes the comment on page 30 that says, if you can learn a simple trick, Scout, you'll get along a lot better with all kinds of folks. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. Okay? He was referring to Miss Caroline at this point. Get into her skin and understand where she's coming from. She doesn't know anything about this community. You can't expect her to know everything on the first day. Get into her skin and understand things from her point of view. I think this is something that our society is not very good at. We try to hold people to our own standards, our own ideals, our own rules. You can't always put somebody into that set of rules that you have or that you live by, because you have to understand them. You have to understand what's going on in somebody else's life. You have to understand what it's like to be that person. My husband's horrible about this. He does not seem to remember what it's like to be a teenager. If he could, he would make the kids stay home and never go out. He doesn't trust them. He wants them home by 9 o'clock. And I've said to him so many times, remember when we were 17? Would you have wanted to be home by 9 o'clock when you were 17 years old? Like, let him stay out till 11, 12. Yeah, he doesn't need to be out half the night. But 9 o'clock for a curfew for a 17-year-old? He doesn't understand what it's like to be a teenager anymore. When I told you that people say that this is the book that's made the most difference in their life, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. These kinds of ways to live life. The idea that before you judge somebody, before you get mad at somebody, before you look down on somebody, you get into their skin and see what their life is like, to try to be understanding. Okay? So here's a huge life lesson right here on page 30. So Cootie, simple trick. So they go on to talk about how Burris only has to come the first day, and Scout's like, oh, if Burris only has to go one day, then I'll only go. And he's like, nope, that's a rule just for the Yules. And he says sometimes you have to bend the law a little bit. And she's like, what? And he says, you have to understand people. You have to give some people some special privileges or different rules because of who they are. So the Yules don't have to come to school except for that first day. Number one, it's because, let's see, they can go to school anytime they want to when they show the faintest symptom of wanting an education. They don't want the education that's being offered to them, and all they do is disrupt it for everybody else. So until they want that education, they're not going to force them to go. All right. The other thing that bends for them is that they're allowed to hunt out of season. They figure that, we're talking about like deer season is only a certain amount of time. And for most people, if you hunt out of season, you risk losing, your gun or your bow and arrow or whatever you're hunting with. They'll take away your weapon, not weapon. They'll take away your guns and stuff. They take away your hunting privileges. They fine you all kinds of money. Like it's ugly if you get caught hunting out of season. But the Yules, it says, let's see. She says, in Macomb County, hunting out of season is a misdemeanor at law, a capital felony in the eyes of the populace. And Atticus says, it's against the law, all right, and it's certainly bad. But when a man spends his relief checks on green whiskey, his children have a way of crying from hunger pains. I don't know of any landowner around here who begrudges those children any game their father can hit. Mr. Yule shouldn't do that. Of course he shouldn't, but he'll never change his ways. Are you going to take out your disapproval on his children? They allow him to hunt out of season because hopefully he can hit something, hopefully he can shoot a deer, and the kids will have something to eat. What good is it going to do to put Mr. Yule in jail? If his kids don't go to school and they put him in jail, he'll be fed. He'll have a place to sleep. He'll be taken care of. But what about those 7 kids who live in a shack out by the dump? What's going to happen to them? And even though Mr. Yule is mean and nasty and he drinks away the money, at least he's there most of the time to try to provide for the kids. And so the law leaves him alone and lets him do what he needs to do. So at the end of the chapter, Atticus and Scout make an agreement that they will continue to read every night, but she's not supposed to tell her teacher. And on page 31, Atticus says, is it a bargain? Yes, sir. We'll consider it sealed without the usual formality. He's talking about the spit in the hands and shake. He's like, let's just consider it sealed. We don't need to actually do that. All right. That'll do it. All right. That was the end of chapter 3. Remember those families that you met. Finches, Cunninghams, Yules. You've met 3 out of the 4 hierarchy.